Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to slumber.
Tonight, we're going somewhere very far away, but not in space, in time.
Six that felt infinite, lush, and alive with creatures that would one day become myths. The Cretaceous period, the last age of giants, the twilight of the dinosaurs. Before we drift back to that ancient landscape, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Is it late evening where you are? The kind of night that feels like it could stretch forever. Or maybe it's early morning, and you're just easing into your day, curious about a world that ended long before ours began. Wherever you are, this is your moment to slow down, breathe, and let your imagination walk through a forest that no human has ever seen. If you find this journey soothing, or even just a pleasant way to wind down, I'd be ever so grateful if you gave. It helps this quiet corner of calm reach others who might need a little escape too. But for now, all you need to do is settle in. Let the world around you fade, because we're about to travel.
To a time when Earth was warmer, wilder, and far stranger than you might think.
Imagine an afternoon somewhere on the Cretaceous Earth. The air is thick with moisture, heavy with the scent of plants you wouldn't recognize.
Their petals attracting insects that have only recently begun their intricate dance with pollen.
The hum of wings fills the air. Dragonflies the size of small birds dart over shallow pools.
Dinosaurs and beetles glint like living gemstones beneath the sun.
You can almost hear the distant bellow of something enormous moving through the forest. The slow, deliberate rhythm of footsteps that shake the ground.
This was not the chaotic volcanic world of early dinosaurs. The Cretaceous was a world of refinement, of balance.
A stage polished by millions of years of evolution.
Continents once clustered together in the supercontinent Pangaea were drifting apart, shaping oceans and coastlines that would one day become familiar outlines on our modern maps. North America was split by a shallow inland sea. Europe was a cluster of islands. Australia was still attached to Antarctica, and India was speeding northward on its way to crash into Asia.
The planet was in motion, not rushing, but endlessly rearranging itself.
The climate was warm, almost tropical across much of the globe. There were no polar ice caps. Only vast forests stretching toward the poles and shallow seas that sparkled under a thick. It was a greenhouse world. Carbon dioxide levels were high, sea levels even higher.
And yet, life flourished in extraordinary abundance. Plants grew thick and fast.
That roamed the plains and forests. This was an Earth at its biological peak, rich, complex.
In this world, you might have seen herds of Triceratops moving like armored tanks through fern fields, their frilled heads swaying as they grazed.
You might have glimpsed a T-Rex standing motionless for a moment before lunging forward with terrifying speed.
The culmination of over 100 million years of evolution in muscle and bone.
Further south, long-necked Tyrannosaurs, some stretching over 30 meters, moved with slow grace across flood plains.
Their necks arched like living bridges, their tails sweeping behind them in arcs of dust and sunlight.
And yet it wasn't all giants. The Cretaceous belonged to the small and the nimble too.
Mammals no larger than rabbits scurried in the shadows, laying the groundwork for what would one day come after. Birds, newly evolved from their dinosaur ancestors, flitted between branches, already testing the skies that would soon be theirs alone. Even the insects were busy rewriting the rules of life, as flowering plants and pollinators formed one of the most successful partnerships in evolutionary history. The world was noisy in its own ancient way. Cicadas buzzed in forests that had never known human footsteps.
The rumble of thunder rolled over coastal plains, where storms brewed in the heat.
Volcanoes far away exhaled occasional columns of ash, dusting everything with a reminder that Earth itself was still restless. But to the creatures of that time, this was normal. It was home. If you could stand quietly beneath a Cretaceous canopy, you might notice how different the light feels. The air, thick with humidity, scatters sunlight in a golden haze. Ferns sway gently in the breeze.
And between their fronds you might catch the glint of an eye. A small dinosaur, feathered and alert.
Its movements are quick, its gaze intelligent. These were not the sluggish reptiles that old movies once imagined. Dinosaurs were active, warm-blooded in many cases, their bodies finely tuned to their environments. Their world had rhythms as steady as any heartbeat. Rain fell in regular cycles, feeding rivers that wound lazily across continents. On land, ecosystems balanced delicately. Predators and prey, plants and pollinators, forests and floodplains.
Life had become a masterpiece of adaptation. It seemed unstoppable.
Of course, the earth beneath it all was already whispering of change. The slow drift of continents altered ocean currents and air patterns. Volcanoes released carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere, sometimes warming the planet, sometimes cooling it.
Tiny fluctuations that no creature could sense were adding up across the centuries. But for now, in this snapshot of time, everything looked eternal. There's something humbling about imagining this world. A planet both alien and familiar. The same blue oceans, the same gravity, the same sun tracing arcs through the sky.
But everything else transformed. It's a reminder that Earth has worn many faces, each lasting only a moment. You might wonder what it felt like to live then, not as a human observer, but as part of that ancient world.
The sense of scale would have been overwhelming. Even the smallest creature would have been dwarfed by its surroundings. Trees rose like cathedrals. The air buzzed with life, and the constant motion of creatures.
There was no silence, only a natural symphony that played without pause. The great predators would have ruled their territories with precision. A Tyrannosaurus might patrol its domain with the confidence of an apex hunter. Healed and durant, its massive head swinging side to side as it scanned for movement. Every sound would matter. The crack of a branch, the rustle of foliage, the distant call of another dinosaur. For the herbivores, survival depended on vigilance. Triceratops would form groups not out of social comfort, but safety.
Their horns weren't ornaments. They were insurance against the jaws of giants.
And still, amid all this drama, there were moments of quiet. A nesting myosaur tending her eggs.
A dragonfly landing briefly on the surface of a pond. A breeze moving through the cycads. Life in the Cretaceous wasn't all chase and hunt. It was also patience, balance, and the slow unfolding of existence.
From space, if you could have looked down on Earth, then you'd see a planet glowing green and blue under swirling clouds. The land masses were smaller, fragmented, the oceans wider. But it would still look alive, more so than ever before.
Photosynthesis. That invisible alchemy of sunlight and air was painting the planet in endless shades of green. The Earth was breathing deeply.
influence. There's an odd comfort in realizing that this world existed completely without us. It thrived. The dinosaurs didn't need observers, historians, or storytellers. They lived, and that was enough.
Their existence wasn't a prelude to ours. It was its own complete story.
One that lasted for millions of years and then ended in a single shattering moment.
But that ending isn't here yet. Not in this moment. Right now, in the warmth of the...
There's no sign that anything is wrong. No hint of the shadow that's coming.
Even the smallest details, the flight of a bird, the growth of a leaf, continue as they always have.
That's what makes this period so haunting to imagine. We know what's coming. They didn't.
For now, the dinosaurs rule unchallenged. They've weathered millions of years of evolution. They've seen continents drift, volcanoes rise, seas expand and recede.
Why should anything change?
It's tempting to think of the Cretaceous as a time of peace before disaster. But that's not quite right. The world was already full of tension and adaptation. Evolution never rests. Every creature was locked in its quiet struggle for survival. Every ecosystem balancing on invisible edges. But still, the scale of what was about to happen was beyond anything life had ever faced. The last age of giants was also an age of transition. A final crescendo before silence. Soon, everything that had become so familiar in this world would vanish, replaced by something new. But that's still ahead of us. Right now, the forests are green, the oceans full, and the air warm.
The stage is set. And so we stand for just a moment at the height of the Cretaceous. The earth turning slowly beneath a sky filled with wings. The seas alive with creatures that glide through ancient currents. Land rumbling with the footsteps of giants. A world unaware that it is about to end.
The Cretaceous world, for all its scale and power, was also astonishingly delicate. Life didn't just survive, performed, improvising across every possible landscape the planet could offer. Forests spread like green oceans, rivers braided through lands, and the air shimmered with the sound of wind.
The earth was busy then, every niche occupied, every rhythm accounted for. To live in that time was to be part of a constant choreography of bloom and battle, growth and hunger,
where every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest predator, carried the story of its ancestors written in bone and instinct.
If you could step quietly through a Cretaceous valley, you would see movement everywhere.
A small herd of hadrosaurs wades across a flooded plain, their tails slicing the surface of the water like the keels of ships. They move with the confidence of creatures that have learned the seasons, the flood patterns, and the safest routes to feeding grounds. Nearby, a cluster of pterosaurs perches along the limestone cliffs, their leathery wings folded like sails between gusts of wind. They are not the clumsy gliders you might imagine, but skilled navigators able to ride thermals with precision. Above them, smaller feathered creatures flit between branches, their calls rising and falling like distant laughter. The Cretaceous Earth was lush, and its abundance was owed to a quiet revolution happening among the plants.
Before them, the land had been ruled by cycads, ferns, and conifers, sturdy but simple in their reproduction.
The emergence of flowers changed everything. Pollen and nectar invited insects to become collaborators, carrying the genetic material of one plant to another with an efficiency evolution had never seen before. In exchange, the insects gained nourishment. It was the beginning of a partnership that would reshape ecosystems and echo all the way to the present day.
Imagine a humid afternoon somewhere in what is now Mongolia. The sun presses down through the haze and the ground trembles faintly, with the movement of distant herds. At your feet, small flowering plants push through the soil.
Yellows, whites, and purples against the green. Bees as we know them don't exist yet, but
Busy in their endless, efficient work. It is here in these quiet, ordinary exchanges that the great transformation of the planet is taking place. Dinosaurs, of course, are the headline act of this world. Their bodies dominate the landscape, but their survival depends entirely on the smaller players. The plants, the insects, the climate. Triceratops and Ankylosaurus graze on the low vegetation that flourishes under the new flowering trees. Dinosaurs strip leaves with beak-like mouths designed for grinding. Even the predators depend on these systems indirectly. Their prey sustained by the relentless work of roots and sunlight. Every roar, every chase, every nest. The battles of this world were not only physical but ecological. Competition was constant. New species arose. Climate zones shifted as continents drifted, creating fresh opportunities for some and crises for others. In North America, the Western Interior Seaway split the land into two vast regions, each with its own evolving cast of species. In the north, forests grew dense and temperate. In the south, they thinned into warm plains.
across these divided lands, evolution raced to fill every opening. Horns, frills, armor.
Each generation adjusting slightly to the pressures of its environment. The plant life shaped much of this competition. The spread of flowering plants meant new foods, but also new strategies for reaching sunlight. Trees grew taller, leaves thinner, and roots deeper. Insects adapted to the variety of blooms, their bodies changing to carry pollen more efficiently. Some evolved longer tongues, others specialized jaws, each adaptation linking one life to another in a web of dependency. The Earth was no longer just a stage for survival. It had become a living network of partnerships and rivalries. In the oceans, the story was no less dramatic. Warm, shallow seas covered much of the continents, filled with giant mosasaurs hunted in these waters, sleek and muscular, apex predators of their realm. Their jaws could crush bone with a single bite. Yet they shared the seas with delicate creatures. Plankton, algae, and tiny shell builders that together sustained the entire food chain. When one population flourished or faltered, the effects rippled outward like waves after a storm. To picture this world properly, it helps to think of scale. The Cretaceous wasn't simply a collection of giant animals. It was a planet operating on every level of life. Microbes in the soil fixed nitrogen for plants. Insects pollinated and decomposed. Amphibians filled the margins between land and water. Mammals, though still small, were beginning to diversify in secret, waiting for their chance. At least, the air itself carried the breath of millions of species. It was thick with the scent of growth, decay, and predation shaped everything. Every species was both hunter and hunted, and the balance between them was delicate. Tyrannosaurus rex was not simply a monster. It was an integral part of the ecosystem, keeping populations in check, remoting the weak and allowing plants to regenerate. The same pattern played out in every habitat. In the forests of what is now South America, the giant herbivorous titanosaurs grazed. In the swamps of Asia, smaller raptors stalked their prey with intelligence and cooperation. But for all its grandeur, this was a fragile balance. The Cretaceous world operated under conditions that could not last forever. Volcanoes occasionally darkened the skies, reminding everything that the planet itself was alive and volatile. Climate shifts, though gradual, could alter entire ecosystems. Yet somehow, life adapted again and again. When a forest burned, new plants grew. When sea levels rose, new coastlines became nurseries for life. The world was always adjusting, always learning how to continue.
If you could walk through one of those ancient forests, you might notice how strangely familiar it feels. The buzzing of insects, the rustle of leaves, the calls of unseen birds. They are sounds that never truly vanished. Even the air, warm and heavy, would carry a sense of continuity, as if the planet were whispering through time. The dinosaurs may be gone, but their world shaped the one we live in now. Every tree outside your window, every blade of grass, every bird's call traces its lineage back to this era of bloom and battle.
Some of the creatures of this time were as remarkable for their ingenuity as for their size.
The small raptor-like dinosaurs, for instance, displayed signs of complex behavior, pack hunting, nesting care, perhaps even communication, beyond simple calls. Fossils show evidence of brooding, of parents guarding eggs, of group living. Life was not mindless instinct. It was organized, adaptive, and surprisingly tender.
Evolution was not just shaping bone and muscle, but behavior and intelligence.
And the skies above were changing too. Feathers, which had begun as insulation or display, had become wings capable of sustained flight. Some still had teeth, others had long tails, but they were unmistakably on their way toward the familiar forms we know today. Every time one took off from a branch, it was a glimpse of the future, a world where dinosaurs would not be gone, only transformed. In the seas, coral reefs expanded across tropical shelves, building enormous underwater cities of life. Fish evolved in dazzling variety. Turtles grew large and slow, drifting through lagoons like living islands.
The mosasaurs and plesiosaurs ruled as apex predator, but even they lived by the same rule as everything else: adapt or vanish.
The competition never stopped, even in the quiet depths.
It's easy to think of this age as peaceful, but that's an illusion born of distance. The Cretaceous was a constant struggle. Droughts, floods, storms, and predators made every day a gamble. Survival meant endurance. But through it all, the planet continued to create. New species, new behaviors, new forms of beauty. Evolution never slept. Even when the world seemed calm, the ecosystems of the Cretaceous were as complex as any modern rainforest. Energy flowed in intricate loops from sunlight to leaf, from leaf to herbivore, from herbivore to predator, and back to the soil.
Every death fed new life. Fossilized bones found in floodplains and riverbeds tell this story clearly.
The remains of one animal became nourishment for another, directly or through decay. Nothing was wasted.
Even in extinction, life was feeding itself.
One of the quiet marvels of this era was how evenly distributed life had become. Warm temperatures and fossil forests found in what is now Alaska and Antarctica show that these regions, though dark for part of the year, were covered in greenery. Dinosaurs lived there too. Smaller species adapted to cooler conditions, their metabolisms keeping them active through long winters. The adaptability of life was astonishing, as if Earth itself refused to draw boundaries. You might think of the Cretaceous as Earth's grand experiment in abundance. It tested every possible shape, color, and behavior. Some creatures grew armor, others relied camouflage. Some ran on 2 legs, others on 4. Some flew, some swam, some burrowed underground. Every form was an answer to a question the environment was asking. And for a time, those answers worked perfectly. But in the middle of all this success, there were hints of fragility. Some species began to disappear even before the final catastrophe.
Changes in sea levels and volcanic activity caused local extinctions. Food sources shifted. When we imagine this world, it's tempting to see it as distant and unrelated to ours. But in truth, we are living in its aftermath. The flowers outside your window, the bees hovering nearby,
The birds that fill the morning air, they all descend from this age.
Systems built in the Cretaceous didn't vanish with the dinosaurs. They evolved, adapted, and continued.
We are in a very literal way walking through the continuation of that ancient story.
The world of bloom and battle was not a pause before destruction. It was a triumph in its own right. A world at the height of complexity, the culmination of billions of years of experimentation. Every creature that lived then was the result of unbroken survival, stretching back to the dawn of life.
Every leaf, every egg, every footprint in the mud was part of that vast ongoing experiment called evolution.
And though we know now how it ends, the fire, the dust, the silence,
the herd still grazed, the predators still hunted, the forest still bloomed, the insects still danced among the flowers, unaware that they were part of something enduring. If you close your eyes and picture it, you might almost hear it.
The steady breathing of a planet alive in every corner. The faint tremor of footsteps too large to imagine.
The hum of wings. The whisper of leaves. Life at its most complete.
Unaware that it was nearing the edge of change. The Earth had created its masterpiece.
And even though it didn't know it, the curtain was already beginning to rise on a new act.
The air would soon darken. The balance would soon break. But not yet.
For now, the world was in bloom, and the battle for life continued quietly, beneath a sun that had no reason to sustain. The seas of the Cretaceous were vast, warm, and restless. They spread across the continents in wide, shallow expanses that blurred the line between land and ocean. To stand on the shore of one of these inland seas would have been to look upon a landscape in constant motion,
where the horizon shimmered with humidity and the air carried the mingled scents of salt vegetation and distant storms.
These waters were the silent architects of the age, shaping coastlines, feeding ecosystems, and the planet would ever know. The Cretaceous was an oceanic world in every sense. Much of North America lay beneath a broad sea that cut the continent in two, from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico. This western interior seaway was not a static body of water. It shifted with the seasons and the slow breathing of the planet.
Expanding and retreating over millions of years. To its west lay rising mountain ranges.
Rivers poured into it, carrying sediments that settled in quiet layers, capturing fossils and traces of the creatures that once swam there. If you could have floated upon those waters, you would have seen an ecosystem as rich as any coral reef today. Beneath the surface moved schools of fish in dazzling patterns, their scales catching the sunlight that filtered down in soft green-gold beams. Ammonites, spiral-shelled relatives of modern squid, drifted gracefully, their tentacles exploring the currents. They were ancient travelers, having survived multiple mass extinctions already, and they carried with them the geometry of time itself. Each coil a record of growth and endurance. Deeper still, in the open waters, swam the true giants of the Cretaceous seas. Mosasaurs, the undisputed ruler of the marine world, glided through the depths with serpentine grace. They were reptiles, not fish, descended from land-dwelling ancestors who had returned to the water generations before.
Their bodies were built for speed, driven by powerful tails that sliced through the currents like blades.
Their jaws, lined with conical teeth, could seize and crush anything that crossed their path. Fish, turtles, even smaller mosasaurs.
Some stretched over 15 meters, long enough to rival a modern whale. These predators moved with precision.
They did not chase blindly. They waited, turned, and struck with calculated force.
Each motion conserved energy in a world where food, though abundant, was never guaranteed. Fossil evidence shows that some species of mosasaurs gave birth to live young, suggesting that they lived their entire lives in the sea. No nesting grounds on land, no clumsy crawls across beaches. They were creatures of the deep in every sense. Among them swam plesiosaurs, their long necks moving like eels through the water, their paddle-like limbs beating rhythmically. Some species had necks so extended they seemed impossible. Each vertebra is in part of an elegant and improbable design. Their heads were small, but their reach was long, perfect for darting into schools of fish or snatching prey that drifted too close. They were slower than the mosasaurs, but no less efficient, gliding silently through the water as if time itself moved at their pace.
Above them, in the open air, pterosaurs circled, scanning for movement beneath the waves.
Some species, like pteranodon, had wingspans over 7 meters and could travel vast distances across the seaway,
diving occasionally to snatch fish near the surface. Their cries would echo across the water, mingling with the hiss of waves against the shore. From a distance, they might have looked like seabirds, but their flight... The Cretaceous oceans were not merely hunting grounds. They were nurseries of evolution. New species of fish appeared, their bodies adapting to every possible niche.
Shallow swimmers, bottom feeders, fast predators built for bursts of speed. The first recognizable ancestors of modern sharks thrived here too, their sleek forms already perfect for the endless chase. Rays glided along the seabed, stirring clouds of sand in search of shellfish.
Crustaceans scuttled among coral and seaweed, their claws and armor as intricate as any mechanical invention. And at the base of it all, invisible to the eye, was the quiet miracle of plankton.
Tiny drifting organisms that captured sunlight and transformed it into energy, feeding everything above them in the chain. Their presence filled the water with life. Every breath taken by every creature in the Cretaceous seas
began with these microscopic architects of abundance.
It is humbling to realize that the mightiest mosasaur owed its existence to the quiet labor of unseen plankton drifting on the current.
They provided shelter for countless small species, fish, mollusks, and invertebrates that darted in and out of the labyrinthine coral walls. The reefs thrived in the warmth of the Cretaceous seas, growing taller, brighter, more complex with each passing generation. Life in these reefs operated in perfect cycles: birth, growth, decay, renewal, all repeating endlessly beneath the waves.
The oceans were also archives. Every year, sediments fell gently to the bottom, layering over the last.
Dead organisms sank, their remains trapped in the mud, forming the fossil record that would one day tell this story.
The shells of ammonites, the teeth of mosasaurs, the scales of fish, all slowly turned to stone. Time worked patiently in these depths, writing the history of the world grain by grain.
Not everything in these waters was peaceful. Competition was constant, and the ocean's abundance came at a cost. For every successful predator, hundreds of smaller creatures struggled to survive. Fossilized shells show evolving spines or patterns that help them blend into the background. Adaptation was the rule, and the pressure never ceased.
Storms were frequent and violent. The Cretaceous climate, while generally warm, was not without extremes.
Seasonal changes brought tempests that could churn the shallow seas into chaos. Waves rose like walls, tearing at coastlines, and scattering debris across miles. In those moments, the delicate balance of life could be undone in an instant.
Yet, even after the storms passed, the sea would calm, and the cycle would begin again. That rhythm, destruction, and renewal was the ocean's heartbeat.
If you could descend into the darker layers of the water, where sunlight no longer reached, the world would change completely. Down there, the colors fade, replaced by the quiet glow of bioluminescence.
Strange, soft lights drift through the black organisms that make their own illumination. Jellyfish-like creatures pulse gently, their bodies almost transparent. Predators lurk in the dark, their eyes adapted to the faintest shimmer of motion. In this world of shadows and silence, survival takes on a different form. The pace slows, yet even here, life thrives. These depths remind us that the ocean has always been a world apart, self-contained, mysterious, and largely beyond the reach of land. While the dinosaurs ruled the surface, these unseen realms followed their own ancient logic, unchanged and undisturbed. When the skies darkened and the land grew cold, the deep ocean would remain a refuge, insulated by its vastness. The chemistry of the Cretaceous seas was also changing, though the animals living there could not have known it. Volcanic activity on land released carbon dioxide that was slowly absorbed into the water, altering its acidity. Subtle shifts in temperature and salinity created layers within the ocean that determined where different species could live. Some regions grew rich in oxygen, others poor. Life adapted accordingly, redistributing itself with each fluctuation. To the creatures within it, the sea must have seemed eternal, but it was already beginning to change in ways that would matter profoundly later. The distinction between land and water was blurred. Dinosaurs waded into tidal flats to feed, while fish and amphibians ventured inland with the tides. Fossil tracks found in these regions reveal that even their footprints mingling with those of turtles and crocodiles. These interactions between land and sea, in those estuaries, you might have seen a group of small bird-like dinosaurs stalking along the shore, their feet sinking into the wet sand. They snap at fish trapped by the retreating tide, their feathers slicked dark with water overhead.
The air shimmers with heat, and the horizon wavers.
Splash of a diving predator, the hiss of the breeze moving through reeds. It is a moment that feels alive in every direction. The kind of stillness that only exists when everything is moving. Every creature in this world lived within limits defined by the sea. Even the dinosaurs far inland depended on it indirectly. The oceans controlled the climate, the rainfall, the temperature of the air. They were the engine of Earth's stability. Every drop of water evaporated into the sky, fell as rain, and returned again, carrying nutrients and minerals that sustained life on land. The fossils found today in ancient seabeds tell us that this balance persisted for millions of years. Same layers that hold the remains of ammonites and mosasaurs also preserve pollen from flowering plants, ash from distant volcanoes, and traces of meteorite dust. The ocean collected everything, holding it quietly until we were ready to read it. It is a vast library of time, written not in words, but in calcium and carbon. When you imagine this world, it's easy to focus on the great beasts, the predators, the size, the spectacle. But the deeper truth of the Cretaceous ocean lies in its subtlety. It was a system of relationships, of endless interactions between the smallest and the largest forms of life. It was an ecosystem built on cooperation as much as competition. Even the fiercest predator depended on the unseen labor of algae and plankton, of currents and chemistry. There's something almost meditative about picturing that endless expanse, the light filtering down through the water, slow undulation of movement, the rise and fall of the tides. For all its ferocity, the ocean was a place of rhythm. The waves carried energy across thousands of miles, touching shores that no creature had yet named. The pulse of that energy has never stopped. When you stand at the edge of the sea today and listen to the surf, you're hearing the same rhythm that shaped the Cretaceous world. The same waves, the same gravity, the same ancient heartbeat. In those waters, evolution was quietly preparing for what came next. New groups of fish were beginning to... Early relatives of seabirds were testing the boundaries between air and water.
Submarine reptiles were shrinking in size, specializing for survival in tighter niches. The ocean was already writing its next chapter, one that would unfold after the Great Extinction. But for now, it was alive in full. If you were to dive there, the experience would be overwhelming. Colors, the sound of your own heartbeat mixing with the faint roar of distant currents, the flash of movement at the edge of vision. Every sense would be filled with life. It would feel eternal, as though nothing could disturb it. That illusion of permanence was one of the ocean's oldest tricks, its calm surface hiding a world of constant change beneath. In time, the balance would shift. The Earth's climate would falter. The tides would draw back. For now, the sea was everything. A cradle, a battlefield, a mirror. Its light touched every part of life, even the land it could not reach. Oceans of the Cretaceous were the planet's memory and its promise, a world of shadows and light that shaped everything to come. Above the shimmering seas of the Cretaceous, another world unfolded. It was lighter, thinner, and filled with motion.
The air itself was alive with wings, from tiny, darting creatures that flitted without a single flap. The sky had become its own wilderness.
The age of dinosaurs was not just about the ground and sea. It was also the moment when life truly conquered the air. The skies of that time would have looked nothing like the ones we know. The light was softer, scattered through the haze of humidity that wrapped much of the planet. Clouds formed thick and high, glowing with reflected sunlight that bounced from the oceans below. Across this endless dome of air moved creatures that were part dinosaur, part something new. The Cretaceous sky was not empty space. It was a living habitat, layered like the forests and oceans beneath it.
Filled with predators, scavengers, travelers, and explorers of the wind.
Among the first to claim these heights were the pterosaurs, masters of flight long before any bird spread its wings. They had ruled the air for millions of years, adapting into dozens of forms, from small, agile hunters that darted over rivers
To enormous species whose wings stretched wider than any creature before or since. Their bodies were built for flight.
hollow bones, powerful muscles, and wings formed from a thin membrane of skin that stretched from their elongated fourth finger to their sides. Theirs was a different kind of flight than birds. It was gliding, soaring, efficient, and ancient. Imagine a coastline at dawn. The mist rises slowly over the water, and from the cliffs, a group of pteranodons launches into the wind. Their wings catch the rising air currents, and they glide effortlessly, barely moving. Below them, the ocean. Every tilt of a wing, every subtle shift in angle, allows them to stay aloft with almost no effort. They dip their long beaks toward the water, snatching prey in a quick, precise motion.
A few call out to each other, their voices echoing across the waves, low and resonant. It is a routine repeated thousands of times a day, as natural to them as breathing.
On the cliffs, younger individuals watch and wait. They stretch their wings, testing the breeze.
Their first flights will be dangerous. A misjudged gust, a stumble, and the fall could be fatal.
But instinct drives them to try. When one finally leaps, it's not graceful.
A tumble, a frantic beat of wings, then suddenly lift. The air catches and the creature steadies.
For the first time, it feels the invisible strength of the wind beneath it.
Flight isn't just movement. It's a negotiation with physics, a balance between gravity and lift.
The pterosaurs had mastered that conversation better than any creature before them.
As time passed, their variety grew. Some species evolved long crests on their heads, possibly for display or stability.
descendants of small feathered dinosaurs who had taken a different evolutionary path. The first true birds had been experimenting with flight for millions of years. Fossils like Archaeopteryx from earlier in the Jurassic show that feathers first appeared not for flying, but for warmth or display. Over time, those feathers became longer, more specialized, until they began to catch the air. The line between gliding and true flight blurred. In the Cretaceous, that experiment had reached its peak.
The skies now belong to two very different kinds of flyers. The leathery-winged pterosaurs
and even similar nesting behaviors. But evolution had given them something extraordinary. Feathers capable of generating lift. This meant agility. Where pterosaurs soared long distances, birds could twist, turn, and hover. They could dart between trees and escape predators with maneuvers that the larger flyers could never match.
In a Cretaceous forest, you might have seen small, bird-like creatures flitting through the undergrowth.
Many had long feathered tails that helped them steer. Their feathers were iridescent, shimmering with greens, blues, and copper hues. Just like modern birds, each movement was a precise calculation of balance, wings adjusting subtly with each gust of air.
They weren't just surviving. They were exploring a new dimension of existence. The evolution of flight reshaped ecosystems in ways no single development had before.
Flight allowed creatures to reach new habitats, escape ground-based predators, and find food in places that had once been inaccessible. Insects, which had already spread widely thanks to the flowering plants, now faced a new kind of predator. Birds fed on them in vast numbers, keeping populations in check while also spreading seeds and pollen between plants.
Flight connected the sky to the ground in an endless exchange of energy and life. Over lakes and rivers, early water birds hunted for fish, their beaks long and pointed.
In the forests, smaller species fed on insects or seeds, nesting in the branches of the new flowering trees. Each species found its place in the layered airspace above the earth. Some stayed close to the ground, darting between ferns and bushes.
Others soared high, riding thermals above the treetops. The Cretaceous sky was...
The relationship between birds and the land below them was intimate. When volcanoes erupted or wildfires spread, many birds could flee,
carrying the memory of the land with them, seeds in their stomachs, spores on their feathers. When the world changed, they carried the possibility of renewal across great distances. Even in an age defined by giants, it was the lightest creatures that would prove the most enduring.
One of the most fascinating details about these early birds is how quickly they diversified.
Fossil evidence shows an explosion of species during the Late Cretaceous, each adapted to a specific niche.
Others soared high, riding thermals above the treetops. The Cretaceous sky was...
Not all that flew had feathers. The pterosaurs, though ancient, continued to thrive in parallel.
In some regions, they grew even larger. Quetzalcoatlus, one of the last and greatest of them, could reach heights comparable to a giraffe when standing on the ground. Its wingspan stretched over 10 meters. Yet, despite its size, it could fly.
Not through brute strength, but through mastery of air currents.
It likely used a technique called dynamic soaring, catching the wind rising from cliffs and ridges to stay aloft for hours with minimal effort.